Our next speaker for today are architect Ahmad Al Ali and architect Farid Ismail from X Architects, Dubai. Architect Ahmad Al Ali is an architect and entrepreneur from UAE. He graduated from the University of Sharjah with a degree in architecture and established a critical design firm named X Architects in the year 2003. X Architects' work has gained continuous recognition and they have been exhibited in international reputed venues like Royal Institute of British Architects, RIBA, in London in the year 2011 and Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in the year 2014. In 2010, architect Ahmad Al Ali was honored with the prestigious and one of the highest ranked local awards, the Mohammed bin Rashid Award for Young Business Leaders. Architect Ahmad Al Ali ardently contributes to various research projects and has collaborated on Abu Dhabi's Urban Planning Council Building and Neighborhood Guidelines. He is a board member of the Canadian University of Dubai, the UAE University of Al Ain and Al Hussein University in Abu Dhabi. He is actively involved in academic spheres and is a recurring critic as well as a lecturer at various educational institutions and associations. Architect Ahmad Al Ali recently lectured and joined a panel discussion called Housing the Spring at the Harvard University.
The remote?
Architect Farid Ismail studied architecture at the American University of Sharjah School of Design. He co-founded X Architects in 2003 in Dubai. Over the past 13 years, the office has developed an international reputation with a diverse portfolio of projects ranging work from master plans, civic and cultural buildings, offices and residential buildings to private houses. X Architects believes in design as a process. The studio researches into creating a built environment that is adaptive and contextual. Their sensible yet critical design approach recognizes the inherent complexity in modern-day building and harnesses this complexity to produce projects that are culturally robust, place-sensitive, and environment-friendly. His work has been recognized internationally through various awards. He was awarded the Wholesome Award for Sustainable Construction 2008, the ARC Middle East Award for Architecture 2009 and 2010, and the Cityscape Award for Sustainable Master Plan. Architect Farid Ismail has lectured in various universities and institutions worldwide. He is also a regular guest critic. He was a speaker at TEDx in Abu Dhabi, Harvard University, University of Toronto, and Doha Architecture Forum.
Next and previous. There's no laser.
He exhibited and contributed to the Venice Biennale in 2008, 2014, and 2016, Louisiana Museum of Modern Art, and Archipre. Currently, he is working on several projects including the Darib Al-Mashair Master Plan in Mecca, the UAE Embassy in Qatar, the conservation and extension of the Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa House in Al Ain and the Lusail Housing in Doha. We would now like to invite architect Ahmad Al Ali and architect Farid Ismail onto the dais for their presentation. May we have a huge round of applause.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting us today to talk about our ideas and projects. I'll be presenting on behalf of X Architects and on behalf of as well my partner Ahmed, who is sitting here. It's been quite an amazing day since morning. Lots of inspiring projects, inspiring ideas. And it's a real pleasure to be part of this series of lecture. This is my second time being here in Mumbai, talking to students. And what I've been amazed in both times is the level of the involvement of the students and the curiosity. And at any moment, any time that they found, they all want to ask questions and they want to learn something new, which is really fascinating for me. This chart here, this diagram, it shows the two, I would say, two important decades of the oil boom. One was at the 70s and one was in 2000, which it had a really big impact on the way our cities form, specifically, I would say, in the Gulf, in the United Arab Emirates. And in the 70s, where was the early days and the formation of the UAE, it was the time that the societies were formed. And as a result, it almost changed completely the way that the cities function. Or in the first case, actually, it established the cities, and then the way the city functions, and the way the societies have been almost living in that part of the world for centuries, and so forth. Of course, from very early days, the leaders of the UAE, they were involved in this development passionately. And here you have the picture of the founder of UAE, the late Sheikh Zayed, who's reviewing a plan for a local housing scheme. Prior to that, you had two different types of settlement. You had people who lived, I would say, by the sea, so where you had these courtyard houses that were kind of on the edge of the creek or the sea. And then they had this kind of arish, which is the palm tree kind of enclosure where they had their animals being kept with them. And on the other side, you had people that they were nomads, so they were moving in the desert from one part to other parts, depending on the time of the year, in a way to have an access to the food and to kind of to escape the heat and so forth. Knowing that the environment in our area is extremely hot, we're talking about 50 degrees, kind of very typical for us, and a very high humidity. And the animals were always part of the kind of the economy and the part of the way people live. So the animals, whether they're used to use them for feeding or the economy, or at the same time used for transportation and so forth. So the cities, I mean, and the settlements, I would say, more often had been, the notion or the ideas had been developed over time in a very intelligent and very smart way. I would say builders from generation to generation have been learning how to deal with this environment and how to deal culturally with the society, so to design typologies that respond to the way the people live, and at the same time to be very, I would say, environmentally friendly. Having said that, by discovery of the oil in the early 70s and the boom that happened, the speed of the development was in a way done in a fast way. That in a way the typology had gone through kind of a big and dramatic change. So from typologies, I would say, which was much more contextual, developed over time using climate, regional material, being very climatically sensitive, socially very kind of responsive, into kind of a typology which is kind of fully relies on technology, I have to say, and on mechanical. So you have these objects in the middle. So these are typical housing that you have. So you have a house in the middle, and then you have a compound wall, which is, in a way, it becomes, it acts as it's supposed to act as a privacy wall and so forth. Which, in a way, it kind of creates this kind of isolation between the inside and outside. And every house, it becomes almost this freestanding without any kind of relation to the urban context and so on. At the same time, these cities, I would say, went through major changes. So from cities that, in a way, were more pedestrian-oriented, I would say the scale of the cities much more sensible, shade and shadow, creating a public space in between the sikkas, in between the alleyways and so forth. It was transformed into cities or urban plan that is completely depends and relies on car. So this is the very early effort, images that shows that at the same time it was necessity in a way to bring back, to almost to encourage the nomads, the Bedouin, to settle down. It was kind of, you had to respond to their need. So therefore there were these big plots in a way allocated for their housing, where in a way you see the plots are divided in serious sections, and then you have a section in the back with a separate access that was mainly, I would say, for the animals. So where they keep their animals, it becomes they could access it from totally separately. And then from the other side, you had a layer of kind of a zone for greenery, for agriculture. So people could have, their own palm tree and so forth, as the way they used to live in oasis and so on. And then separate entrances for the guests and for the family and the service zones and so on. So as a result, it became kind of quite a very, I would say, spread out typology, which at that time, in a way, it was a response, and it was to the need of the society in order to encourage the people that they are the nomads to settle down and to create the civilization and so forth. So as a result, so this became a kind of a general, I would say, an overview of the cities that is the mainly infrastructure. It becomes dominant and it becomes the more, I would say, the symbol and the character of the city rather than, I would say, the architecture and sensibilities of architecture. This is image. It shows that how, again, so people, they changed, and the idea of a car was very much welcome. So people, in a way, they enjoyed this modernity. So everybody wanted to have a car. Everybody, at the same time, they wanted to kind of maintain the relation with their history, with their past, and so forth. So it was the idea of kind of this American dream, where in American society, the car industries were kind of advertising that people should live in a suburb where you are away from the crowd of the cities, and then you have a car, you have your own boat, and you go back and forth. And that was kind of a symbol of the luxury and the modernity and so forth. And the idea was very much welcome, in all parts of the world, which in a way transformed the cities completely in a very dramatic way. So the famous saying from Jane Jacob, which is not a TV or illegal drugs, but automobile has been the chief of the American communities. Now here, I'm not against modernization. I'm not trying to be against cars or bringing cars into the city. I mean, definitely it's a necessity. We have to, as the society develops, as a new technology comes, we have to respond to it. But I think sensibility of architects and master planners are important. So as architects, we have to take the new inventions, and we have to respond to it in a very sensible and which is responsive to the culture, responsive to the environment in every specific different, I would say, geographical location. Now, looking at these diagrams, so I would say since very initial start, so you see the housing typology has never changed, although you see the objects in the middle, it keeps changing the form, but the typology has remained the same. So we have big plots, and with this line, the compound wall, which is the privacy wall. So the main purpose of these walls are to create privacy, but in a way they don't, because the neighbors, they could look into your plot. So there hasn't been any kind of attempt to change that, except maybe changing the object. And as a result, so these are the conditions. So you have this kind of huge alleyways and sekkas that nowadays, in a way, being unused and left over. And there is no relation between the program and what happens inside the house and what happens externally. I mean, historically, I mean, people in all parts, in the UAE, in the Middle East in general, they're very social. So they used to have always majlis. Majlis is the guest area where everyone comes in, and that's always directly attached to the sekkas or to the alleyways and so forth. So, and then they had the kind of niches or the areas where people used to gather and interact and socialize and so forth. So I think, we did kind of lots of research, and that was the place we found that somebody was trying to regenerate those spaces, but unfortunately not, maybe with not a lot of success. So this is kind of course, over time, generation, things has changed now. So the idea of the agriculture or the greenery in front of the house are in a way turned into more of a desert areas. And sometimes you have a distance between one house to another house is up to 200 meters. So the only way for you to know, to be able to talk to your neighbor is to phone them up. So there is no any physical interaction between you and your neighbor. There's a saying from Prophet Muhammad, a hadith, that says that each Muslim in a community should take care of the 7 neighbors. So in this diagram, we're saying if every neighbor is 200 meters, then 7 neighbors becomes kilometers. It's almost impossible to do that. So this is a typical density. What you see all over, I mean, if you just go Google Map, you see it in many, of course, not a very downtown. The moment you go out of the downtown, that's a typical, I would say, local housing environment. So every house has the same floor plan. So you enter, to your right is majlis, to your left is living room, a lobby in the middle, and things happen around it. So the only difference is that the way they dress them and the way they color them up. And in some cases, people try to choose or to have different type of decoration and different types of colors of the doors in a way to distinguish and to create a unique atmosphere for themselves. Now, these are recent developments. So in 2010, they announced that, the UAE announced that they will be doing 50,000 new housing projects. And these were one of the initial kind of sample house that was handed over to the citizens of the UAE. So we said, okay, if we take every plot, which is every plot is 30 meter by 36 meter, and if you multiply the compound wall that you built and it doesn't function by 50,000, it's in a way you can build the wall from Dubai to Johannesburg. So that's how much concrete, in a way, we use to create this privacy wall, but which in a way doesn't really function and so forth. So as a result, you see the cities in the region has dramatically changed in scale, and many of these sizes and many of these areas has been dedicated to infrastructure, cars, and alleyways, rather than kind of creating, I would say, sensible and kind of an urban areas. So there has been some effort recently to try to make these typologies sustainable. So there hasn't been any, I would say, an effort to change the typology, but rather to work within what they have to create some shadings, to create, building solar panel, and so forth. So I mean, it's always important to know that when you want to do something sustainable, the idea is first you have a right approach. You design it right, passively, responsive, culturally, socially, economically. And once those are achieved, you bring in technology to enhance the performance, rather than we do something that doesn't work and then we try to bring the technology to make it function a little bit better. It's a project we did. It's a master plan. It was at the boom time. It's in Bawadi, Dubai, which was at that time they announced it was kind of a 10-kilometer strip of kind of leisure, kind of resorts, hotels, and this kind of environment. So a place you could go and ski in the middle of the desert. You could have the biggest water parks. So in a way, kind of a Disney urbanism, if I would like to refer it to. And the idea was that every project has to have a theme. So my theme is ski, my theme is water, my theme is, it has to have something. Now, we had this 60-hectare master plan that we had to design. It was beautiful mixed use, but once we start to look at the site is a desert, of course, it's a flat desert. When you look at initially at the site, you might say, okay, it's a desert, there is nothing inspiring, let's do whatever we can and just have any ideas from anywhere else in the world and parachute it. But having kind of going deeply into the nature, you see the nature, they always adapt itself to environment. So if you look at these foxes, every fox, it depends to where they are. They have different color to camouflage. They have different skin in order to be able to survive. So if you flip them from their environment, they cannot survive. They, in a way, certain, they die off because of they cannot sustain those environments. So the idea was, we said, okay, what about we look at the desert and we look at the natural forces that exist in the desert and how we could learn from these and to create a master plan that is responsive to all these natural forces. At the same time, to create a master plan that is socially interactive and it becomes a place that people could walk, people could interact. The scale of these cities are, in a way, done in a very specific way. So we started by mapping the greenery in the site. So there are a bit of greenery on the site, but that means where you have greenery, that means you have more water underground. So we started to kind of, in a way, locating or massing or build form in a specific place where the sites were more, kind of more dry, but at the same time, use the kind of gray water that is being produced by the human activities to boost the biodiversity, I would say, within the desert. Using the species and the plants that they were indigenous and they were from the site. And instead of you bring a kind of a plant from tropical and then you try again to make it work, we said, okay, what about we enhance, we just, with a minimum, I would say, intervention, we try to greenify, or to try to bring the beauty back to the desert. And these were the environment that in a way it was created, that is kind of all the bushes and plants and trees, they require a minimum maintenance, minimum amount of water. Water being very precious. We don't have any fresh water, access to fresh water, so it's generally the water is being through desalination, the sea, and it's quite a very expensive process to do it. Or kind of treating the desert in a way by minimal, I would say, intervention of greenery, creating the shade areas where people could walk and interact with the environment. Of course, besides the landscape, we use, I would say, multiple more active and technological intervention to reduce the usage of the water, whether it's subsoil irrigation or the usage of the water-saving taps and so on. So as a result, I mean, we had a kind of great saving in water and so forth. Looking at the wind, so wind, again, was quite an important element on the site. So we have a hot wind that comes from the desert, and then we have a cooler wind that comes from the sea. So the idea was how we could bring in the cool wind that is coming from the sea and to almost reject or diversify or to cool down the hot wind that is coming from the desert. That's in a kind of an effort to cool down the overall atmosphere of the city. So as you see here, the kind of the rugged skyline, kind of using the vegetation, then different techniques to cool down the hot air or to divert them that they're coming from the desert, and using the courtyard in a way as an area in a way to create this wind turbulences and to cool down the smaller environment within the courtyard as well. Oops. So these are some diagrams. I mean, the idea was not only to look at the overall city, but the idea of how we could even bring these ideas into kind of a smaller plots and a micro part of the urban design as well, to make sure that we get a result that is cohesive and is responsive. So this is the overall master plan. As you see, we have almost built 50% of the site. So all the built form, we compacted in this kind of compacted islands. So first it becomes more compacted, so it becomes self-shading, it reduces the heat gain and so forth. And at the same time, we have the other 50%, and that's maybe, by the time that everything is built, that's the only piece of desert that is going to be remaining within that part of the city as a memory of its origin and so on. So again, it was important that we allow people to give a comfort zone for people to walk. So there were I would say, multi-strategies that they were used to create shade for people, so people could walk from any part of the city to other part of the master plan without being exposed to the sun, whether it's the arcades or alleyways or shading devices or landscape and so forth. And we developed this kind of, I would say, multifunctional shading device that is, it becomes a solar panel, so kind of we designed it in a very specific way. And at the same time, it becomes a bus stop, it becomes a car park at a certain point, it becomes a place where people could rest, and becomes a place where create a shade for the people who are walking from one zone to another zone. And it could accommodate as well the lighting designed within it, so it's quite an soil was another element that we had on this site. Of course, looking initially at the site is quite very flat, but it's not really flat. So we didn't want to kind of flatten the site and kind of build the whole thing, but rather that we wanted in a very sensible way to respect the topography and to develop the master plan and the landscape along this existing topography and so forth. So these were some studies, different techniques of treating, of dealing with the change of levels, and how the city could integrate itself with the nature and with its kind of context. So energy, again, I think it's very important for us as an architect to preserve as much as possible, to reduce the usage of our resources. So that was one of the strategy to kind of use, I would say, multi-strategies, whether using solar panel, having different facade strategies depending on the orientation of the building, using a kind of a LED light at that time to, in a way, to reduce the usage. Hello? Oh. Okay. So to reduce the usage of the energy and so forth. So the lighting even within the city were kind of censored and kind of interactive. So in one way, it creates this kind of dynamic. So the more active any part of the city gets, so that means the more lit it is, and the more inactive it gets, that becomes darker and so forth. So if a person is jogging, so almost whatever you're jogging, you have kind of ahead of you and the back of you is almost lit, and the rest it becomes kind of dark and so forth. So again, so climate responsive, so the idea was to bring all these ideas of responding to the climate into each architectural typology to make sure that they contribute to the overall master plan, and they could the overall city could function in a very sustainable way. Of course, like any other project, we had a program. Here, the idea was to create a mixed program, to create a kind of more, I would say, sustainable and balanced social mix within the development. But then instead of kind of having a zone, that was, okay, this is a zone for the housing, this is a zone maybe for the schools and so forth, we wanted in a way to kind of create a mix, kind of, and diverse, I would say, program. So the programs are in a very specific way. They distribute it all over the site. It creates a kind of this different, I would say, density and kind of activity. So the more you come to the center, it's more active, it's more public. And as you go to the edge, you have a different kind of level of publicness, since it becomes the housing. So you have a smaller courtyard for the people that are living in that part and so forth. So this is another project, the Kalba Art Factory. This was part of a series of projects we did for the government of Sharjah. So the idea was to develop a kind of a research, environmental research, and breeding centers for the endangered animals and birds for the government of Sharjah. So this was one of them that we did. This specifically was for the desert mountain animals that they live in the Arabian Peninsula. So initially, the site was in this flat land. I mean, it was a very unique site. We don't get this kind of environment very often. And the site is even covered by this kind of, I would say, very dark, kind of brown, kind of stone. And we thought that instead of kind of building an object on the site, what about we found that there is here this kind of very beautiful hill on the site. We thought that instead of just building a separate object, what about we allow the architecture to be part of that hill? First, it creates a kind of a natural, I would say, enclosure for the animals, so the animals could live in a more natural environment. But at the same time, the architecture almost becomes part of the nature, and it camouflages itself, and it kind of disappears within the nature. And then, of course, we had to add other programs. So each animal had its own kind of requirement, dark space, and different kind of sizes, different scale, different way to maintain them, and so forth. So as you can see, we have added this other program in a way to complement the functionality of the project. So this is the overall. As you see, the architecture almost disappears itself. It camouflages itself within the site. And the experience of the people, it becomes the experience of the nature. So people, they go there, in a way they submerge themselves within this kind of natural environment, and this becomes their experience of the place, seeing the animals and so forth. So as part of the same series, this was another project. It's a WASET. It's the Bird Visitor and Breeding and Research Center. They are at the same time educational center to educate public about the endangered animals and birds in all parts of the world. So the site, it's kind of in the middle of the city. It's almost in the border between Sharjah and Ajman. It used to be a dumped area, which the government of Sharjah over 10 years had kind of cleaned the site. And as a result, because of the high water table, it's created this unique landscape within the site, where it has attracted kind of really amazing types of birds, whether they are birds from the region or they are kind of a migrant bird that has been, in a way, attracted to the site. So the strategy was to kind of create this center, as I said, that to allow people to come and to, of course, to experience the nature and at the same time to create a facility for these birds. So we took the main gallery in a way that we oriented it toward the main view of the site. And then we had the services that we had a change of topography. We almost built the services again, the topography. And as you approach the building, you almost submerge yourself again within the ground. So you park your car, you almost walk down the ramp, you submerge yourself. And then you almost, you have this kind of, where almost the whole architecture disappears itself. So your experience, it becomes purely the nature, and it becomes the environment rather than kind of, I would say, an architecture object. So as you walk into, you enter this kind of, I would say, a very kind of controlled gallery, which is, it works in a very close relation to the nature and to the cages in the both sides, where people could almost, in a way, go and enjoy seeing the nature, seeing the birds, and so forth. So these was an images of an official opening last April, something like that. So these are some moments within the development that where you have a panoramic view of the site, and you could go there, and if you enjoy bird watching and so forth, you could see the birds. And we have, I mean, this is the kind of overall view of the gallery, where you have this kind of a middle kind of a structure, a wall, that almost it accommodates all the system of the building. So that wall, it becomes your structure, it almost becomes your MEP. At the same time, it becomes the interpretive education, it becomes the furniture, and it kind of creates this continuity and kind of this very open and clean space for people to enjoy the nature and to enjoy the birds. So then in some specific way, some specific areas, in a very controlled way, people have access to the outside, so they could go and they could be kind of in a very close contact with some specific type of birds. Some other images. So there are some images, views of the main entry courtyard. So the way that people, they sunk and they submerge themselves, and then they open up into this courtyard and they enter the gallery. The next project I'm going to be talking about, it's kind of an urban sculpture that we did. So the idea was the client came and said they want to do a sculpture to kind of raise awareness about the kind of how fragile our environment is. And kind of to kind of educate public about our environment and to take care of our environment and so forth. So what we did, we looked at, I mean, of course, this gulf tree, which is kind of a symbol of kind of greenery in the desert. That's in many of the desert in the United Arab Emirates, we have gulf. And then we thought that, yes, although the discovery of the oil has been great to the development and the progress of the society, of our cities, of our country, but at the same time, it has put our environment in a very fragile condition. So we thought that what about we propose this kind of forest of floating gulf trees, that they are suspended in these kind of oil pipes that they were used in the drilling to kind of extract the oil, that yes, they were served in a way that they kind of flourish the society, but at the same time, they almost put our environment in the danger. And to create this kind of a public space, you know, underneath it, where it could become the place for different activities, kind of different events, and a place for people to interact, to discuss, and to almost to make a statement of how fragile our environment has become based on these kind of fast developments and so on. So Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa, this is a house in Al Ain. The significance of this house is a house that was built during the transitional period, which is 50s and 60s. So that was a time that is still, I would say, the architecture was very much vernacular. But this was one of the first houses that they used concrete to build the house. So as you see here, although the house is not in a very good shape, I would say, but the architectural language is very vernacular, so you still have the arcade, you still have the arches, you have this rhythm and this repetition and so forth. But they have used concrete, so they use almost the spaces that are still small, so almost the same limitation they had in a local material, that you have with the small spans and so forth. So it was almost carried out here, but only changed the material. So this is an image of the house. Again, late Sheikh Zayed is visiting Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa. I think in one side there are British delegates and the other side are local people in one of the rooms that I'll be showing later, how we've reinterpreted it. So this is the current condition of the house. So it's quite, and the client came to us, and the idea was to turn it into a community place. So a place where there are workshops where people, there are cafes, it becomes, part of it becomes museum, part of it becomes offices. So it becomes a kind of a community center, I would say, for the people. So of course we started to look more deeply into it. So you see there are these beautiful kind of textures, patterns, colors that still exist on the site. And there are even these textures that kind of very modern at the same time. And the idea was how we could really get inspired and to design something that is that we learn, of course, from its history, and we learn from its current condition, and to come up with something that is really not, I would say, a typical or very standard conservation that we had to go back and rebuild the whole thing as it was, but rather to reinterpret every element in a different way. So we've almost identified every single element in this project, from window frames to columns to decorative to floors, ceilings, and any piece of wood that we found in this project. It was identified, it was categorized, and based on, I would say, deep discussions, the idea was what to be kind of reinstated, what's to be reinterpreted, what has to be new interventions. And this gave us an amazing opportunity to come up with kind of with this, to design every space in a very unique and every surface in a very unique and specific way, but at the same time to maintain the harmony. So whatever we propose and we reinterpret, it respects its historical fabric, but at the same time it shows our modern and our contemporary age at the same time. So there are different conditions, the way we've dealt with, whether it's exterior or interior, so there are parts of the walls that are existing, we maintain it. The ceilings that it was not existing, we had to reinvent it. So as you see, every space, in a way, as a result of it, it became kind of very unique. That almost shows the root of its history, but at the same time, it shows kind of its modern and a very kind of new intervention into the project and so forth. So these are the overall master plan, I would say. So the gray areas is the existing building, and we had to build this new extension to accommodate some new program. So historically, the courtyards in the middle, they had been closed by compound walls. So for us, in a way, to reinstate the courtyard and to bring back the life into the courtyard, to make it a public place, and to create a sense of enclosure. So we almost tried to respect the kind of those lines and to build or new extension along those lines. But then instead of kind of building a solid wall, we said, what about we learn from the existing structure, from its rhythm, from its proportion, but we do it in a more modern and contemporary way. So where we propose this kind of translucent kind of walls that in a way that they shade, I would say, the program inside. And at the same time, it creates this interactive between the programs that are happening inside and the cafe and so forth, and the courtyard itself. So you have these panels that they open up completely if it requires, and it creates this connection, and they close themselves, and it becomes the envelope that shades the program, and so on. So images of the courtyard showing how active. So we had this, I mean, the piece in the middle, it's a representation of Baraha. So Baraha had used to be, there used to be a platform historically where those days it was a place that people used to sleep at night when the weather allows. It used to be a place to sit and read poem. It was a kind of a multifunctional place. So here we've again reinterpreted it, and we've recreated that one for different, I would say, cultural activities to happen within the courtyard. Okay, the next project I would like to talk about is the Dubai Creek. I don't know, for the one that you've been to Dubai and you know Dubai, I'm sure everyone has seen or has seen the creek. It's been kind of part of the history of Dubai, part of its growth, its economy, and over a period of time has gone through, I would say, number of modification. Always the idea was to widen the creek, to deepen the creek in a way to allow the boats and the doors that they come from the outside to allow them to come at the heart of the city. And the trades were happening between this area and India and Iran and other countries within the region. And to date, even you have a great, I would say, extent of these trade are happening, although it's not as active as it used to be, but it's happening. But the creek always it divides the city into two. So you have Dubai, which is Bar Dubai, and then you have the Bardeira. And the creek always became this kind of a separation between two. There's quite very exciting. There's a lot of layer of history. As you walk there, there's a lot activity. It's happening. But over time, because of moving the port outside the creek, so the ports are moved to the edge of the sea, I would say the economical and the social activity of the creek has dropped. And as a result, the edge of the creek has turned mainly either into infrastructure, cars, streets, and so forth, or it has turned into car parks. So it has lost its significance. So we were approached in a way to activate this edge of the city, edge of the waterfront, and to bring life and to bring the economy and the society back to this part of the city. So we said the idea, instead of kind of this being as a separator of the two parts, what about we come up with the idea that it brings the two parts of the city together, and it becomes like of this element that stitch the city and create this kind of very vibrant area within the heart of the city. So we started by proposing this kind of a diverse program along the creek that kind of first it responds first to its surrounding, so it becomes kind of it enhances the activities that's happening, and at the same time it allows that people from the outside to come back, with businesses to come back, people to come back and start to activate the zone. So we started by looking this kind of, I would say, very smart module, which is very flexible, very adaptive, whether it's in terms of its use or in terms of adjusting itself to the site and adjusting itself to the environment. And we started by repeating this module in a different way and kind of and kind of creating this very soft edge between the water and the development, which in a way to bring the notion of its history, which, I mean, its whole what historically has to be doors and then the edge of the creek, and then so always there were no almost a clear edge, I would say, between the land and the sea. So this was the image that was created. So you see how the water and the land, in a way, again, they merge and they become one and they start to interact. And then creating spaces like these where, again, it brings back the culture of the kind of flea market, the kind of an informal market. So you create infrastructure, so people those that they're coming from anywhere in the world, they could bring their product, sell there, and then at the same time, they could buy the product from the people in Dubai and bring it back to their own notion and so forth. So spaces in the middle, of course, had to be shaded, compacted, very flexible, and so on. So this is, when you look at this, I mean, for me, the first place that comes to my mind is Mecca. It's always associated, I would say, especially Hajj, with lots of people. So you have people all around the world, Muslims are waiting every year to go to Hajj. The demands are increasing dramatically every day. Currently, we have 4 million people, they're going to the Hajj, and expected in the next 10 to 15 years, it reaches up to 14 million. And that requires, it has almost put huge pressure, I would say, on the government, on the infrastructure, on the society, on how to respond to this kind of mass and to this level of development. Of course, because of the or technological enhancement, one airport can bring millions of people, boats and different kind of transformation, social media and all of that. It's kind of, it increased the demand. So it's a place that you don't have to really have it's a strategy to bring people. So people, they come, is the holiest city of the Muslim world. And to respond to that, it's not a very simple, because you're not really starting, I would say, from an empty land. Rather than you starting from a place that has a long history, it has a kind of ritual procedure, or rituals, Hajj rituals, that whether it's from Quran, it's from Sunnah, that is set, that has to happen. And then as a response, you as a designer, the only option you have, that you try to learn, you understand all these constraints, and you come up with a response, and to see how you could add and how you could respond to these in a way to solve the problems and so forth. So these are just showing maybe some of the process of the rituals and kind of the areas. There are areas that almost impossible to build, and you cannot build. There are areas. And you have to know that all these millions of people, it happens only the period of 10 days. So you have every year, 10 years, millions of people come, and then they all disappear and becomes an empty land, and it will till the next year. So it's quite challenging how you almost do this infrastructure that could accommodate this 10 million for the 10 years, and then 10 days, and then what happens throughout the rest of the year. So this was a collage we did for an exhibition, and the idea was to almost showcase what it takes for the authority and for the government to manage these 10 days, and the effort that people put, from the policemen, from the firefighting, from the cleaning people. It's a huge effort, and you are dealing with people with different language, different part of the world, that you cannot even communicate with them. So simple people, that just to show them where they have to go, or just to communicate with them, it's quite really impossible. And you have to organize them, and you have to facilitate them, and the effort are huge, and it's kind of, and as a result, as you see here, it almost becomes a collapse of the complete infrastructure. I mean, there is no street or cars or kind of that could accommodate all that people in such a short period of time. So even, I mean, a simple thing like usage of the water. So you have, during these 10 days, sometimes the usage of the water becomes more than maybe a country, that the usage of water over a year. So all of that, I would say, it has put a lot of pressure on the city and on the infrastructure and on the authorities to respond to that. I mean, looking at this diagram, it shows maybe for 1,400 years, 1,500 years, the Kaaba was growing very, I would say, in a very slow pace. So you see from a dot, almost it grows very slowly. And then the last 50 years, it grows dramatically over more than 20, 30 times. And from a city that, I mean, to the left, it shows you have the Kaaba in the middle, and then the black one, it shows the buildings. That it's always known that Mecca, that it was a city of mountains. So the city and the buildings, they were built along the mountain, kind of with the topography, respecting the site, respecting the topography. And then to the right, in 2010, the black becomes the building, and then you see the mountain, it almost disappears. And as a result, this is the result. So you have a complete demolishing of the history, complete demolishing of the nature. As a fast response, I would say, is a quick to catch up with the pace of the development, to build at any cost, to build at even if you have to destroy the nature, and even if you have to kind of destroy the identity, destroy the history of the city, and so forth. And the city, as you see here, is kind of dramatically grown, and it's reaching, it's attaching to its neighboring city, which is Jeddah. So this is an image. I mean, 50 years ago, if I asked my grandfather to say Mecca, this is how they will describe to me. So it's a city that has been developed by intelligence of different civilization over time. Very smart, working with its context, working with the environment, working with the topography. You have the alleyway. The ground floor has always been a very public place around Kaaba, because that used to be a place people come from all over the world historically, and it's a place people interact, people exchange goods, people start to educate themselves, to learn about other societies and other civilizations, and go back and redistribute this knowledge back to their own kind of hometown. And these are a typical miniature that you see in any kind of historical book about imagining Mecca. So you have the ark, you have Kaaba in the middle, a very sensible scale, and then you have the arcade, and then you have a bit of architecture and the nature. This is a miniature we did for the exhibition. We said if we have to regenerate the same miniature in our modern day, it will be the Mecca, the center, and then all around it will become towers and cranes and infrastructure and so forth. So totally different identity, totally different way of looking at it. So of course, that's where the learning it comes from. It's the easiest way to maybe deal with the kind of big mass of the people, to learn from cities that they have built a skyscraper, and to bring the typology into your own city. And all of a sudden, you see the Mecca now is racing on the kind of one of the tallest building, and kind of as a symbol of the power and symbol of the iconic building within the structure of the Mecca. So this is the view. You see how the Mecca has changed, and the importance and the kind of these icons with having this clock in a way that becomes a point of reference. Of course, once all of that is done, so they try to make it cultural. They try to bring culture back by adding this crescent on top of the building, which in a way try to make it more contextual or in some way. So if you look at this one, the 1850 to 2013, so always Kaaba was the main, almost the highest point maybe, or the highest structure in some way, and was very flat, and topography, where you have the topography completely changed into tower, and almost Kaaba, it loses its scale and so forth. So this is an image which I believe this Ahmed took himself while he was visiting Kaaba. So you see how dominant it is. So almost even people, when they're walking, they're doing tawaf, the attention, it goes mainly to the clock rather than to the Kaaba. And in many cases, you have people that they're waiting, and they're taking their own selfie with the tower, instead of kind of being a space for rituals and for doing religious activities and so forth. There are many critiques. I mean, there are critiques from people from Mecca itself, that maybe they don't know, they don't like what's happening. They say this is commercialization of house of God. Or they say we don't want to bring New York to Mecca. Or it says, would you allow that tower in Rome or in the middle of London? So it's a question of identity. So you've had certain identity. So does it really, because of the speed of the development, does it work that you almost destroy all the identity and the layers of the history that has been demolished, that is not there, and then you just rebuild the whole thing from the beginning? And the ground floor of the Mecca has even dramatically changed. So from, as I said, from becoming a place that is public area, has almost divided into this series of exclusive, I would say, hotel lobby, shopping malls, that is kind of more exclusive, and I would say more capital. So the typology from a souk, that was a place for interaction, kind of for talking to people, which is more social, more public. The typology has changed in a way to the mall, which everything becomes globalized, everything becomes standard. So the same product you buy in India, in China, you could go and you buy in Mecca. Of course, there has been some attempt, maybe, to conceptualize or to contextualize that. So changing some of the name of the global products, or changing the logos of some of the global products, like Starbucks. So there are even some events. So this is like one of the important hotel next to the Grand Mosque, Kaaba, that it says if you have a view to the Grand Mosque, you know they're selling the view, so you pay extra. So almost this becomes kind of part of the commercialization of the view of the Holy House. Of course, look, I mean the solutions. There are a number of different solutions that one could look at. Looking at the green areas in both city of Mecca and Jeddah, there are informal development that has been happening. So as you can see here, it's not even that much. It's not that far from the clock tower. I mean, there could be development that happens slightly away from this, and then maybe with a smart sort of kind of transportation that people could go back and forth between the Grand Mosque and these areas. This is an actual proposal that we did, an actual project we worked on. It's a site that is, again, it's almost in between a ritual kind of locations, like the Kaaba and the Jamarat and Mina. It's quite a very strategical location. So the idea was here, so I mean, this is the current condition of the site. So looking at the site, again, during the Hajj, the whole infrastructure collapsed. You have people, you have cars, you have everything happening in one surface. And the distances that typically takes you maybe 10, 20 minutes by car, during the Hajj time, it takes maybe 5 to 6 hours, that people almost generally, they prefer to walk rather than using the cars and the streets. So what we thought the idea would be maybe, again, giving the ground floor, giving the back to the people, to design in a more sensible way. So we started to have a complete separation between the people and the infrastructure. So the idea was that we either elevate the streets or we submerge the street, and we create a surface that is absolutely dedicated for the people and the movement of the people. Here we're talking about millions of people. We're talking about 300,000 of people. They walk through this site per hour during the peak time. And the challenge was that what could happen to the space during the non-Hajj time, which the idea was it becomes a public space for the people of Mecca, and becomes for the people that they go for Umrah and so forth. So we used different strategy. We started to free the ground floor, started to create these holding courtyards, getting inspired by the surrounding mountain, and to create the kind of urban mass, adjusting it to allow air, wind, and sun to penetrate through it, and to make it, in a way, more workable. And then we elevated the whole mass. I mean, having a very small areas in Mecca, you can build. So we had quite a high requirement. So we've elevated the whole mass, and then we've created a complete empty ground floor and so forth. So as a result, this is the ground floor, as you see the ground floor. So we created a plaza in the back. We pushed back the only connection that they have now to create a kind of more open space. We created plaza on the other side where people could move easily. And we created second connection between our site and the other second pedestrian connection between our site and the Grand Mosque. So in a way to diverse the people and to ease the traffic and so forth. So these are the models that we've done. So see how the built form, it's almost built itself within its surrounding, the height, the mountains, and topography. And this section, it shows that how the infrastructure it works in a very specific way, in a way to separate itself, to give an easy movement for the infrastructure, which is in this case sunk down, and the easy movement for the people at the ground floor. And then the whole volume of the program, again, is becoming elevated, which they have their own platform and their own kind of a separate public space. Different views of the place. Of course, as I mentioned before, as an architect, besides designing the mass, the circulation, the program, being responsive to the site, we have a responsibility to take care of resources, the energy. So in this project, again, we use multiple strategies kind of to reduce the water and the electricity within the development. Well, another solution even that we thought of, which is at a bigger kind of a scale, we thought, okay, since we have the Mecca and Jeddah, they're almost getting close to each other, and what about kind of proposing a totally new city, which nowadays you could be maybe within minutes back at the heart of the Mecca. You could go easily back and forth. And that over time, maybe this city, it could have its own infrastructure, it could have its own airport, its own kind of facility. So first, it allows more people in a way to come, and at the same time, it reduces the pressure from the mainland of the Mecca. And of course, over time, maybe the cities again they grow, and all of them they form a kind of a mega city that they could work and they could interact socially, culturally, and commercially as well. Thank you very much. Stay here. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. No.